All right, this is Gresh here, and I'm here to kind of have a conversation with Janakowski. And one of the really interesting things that I've been doing and starting this brokerage is kind of reaching out to people that are, laid off, experiencing laid off, and doing all those things. So I was going through LinkedIn, doing some outreach and trying to have conversations with people. And I saw and connected with Dre and saw that he was doing some really phenomenal things with his podcast. So we had a conversation, and it just kind of led us here. And we're gonna see where everything goes and how it takes off. But I'm excited to hear. Dre. I know we talked a little bit, but we wanted this to be like as organic as possible. So I would love to hear a little bit more about your journey, what led you to kind of like do all the awesome things that you're working on.
Yeah. And thanks for having me. I will say this is the first time I've been a guest on a podcast.
Oh, nice.
And it's weird, even though I have my own podcast. I think when you're controlling the narrative, when you're the one doing the interviewing, it's so easy. And so I now understand what every guest has told me is like, I'm nervous because up until a minute ago, I wasn't nervous. And now I'm like, oh, this is real. It's happening. But about me, about 3 months ago, from today's recording date, back in May, I was laid off from my job for the first time ever. And there was a lot of feelings, but not the ones that everyone experiences. I think a lot of what I was seeing out there was people constantly talking about how they were, grieving and they were upset and they were crying. I was so stoic. I was like, I didn't want to work anyways. So this was like a blessing in disguise. I just wish I had like millions of dollars as a payout in order to not work. And what I quickly realized is I was about 4 or 5 months prior, I was looking for an aha moment, something that I could take, that I could go, potentially viral with a story. And I couldn't come up with anything. And then this layoff happened and I was like, is this it? Is this the little moment that maybe I'll have to start making something? And I decided to document, and not the way that you do, here's day 1, here's day 2. I kind of started like that, but I really wanted to document all the things, right? Like the highs, the lows, talking to other people, hearing their stories. And thus I started a podcast.
Nice. I appreciate you sharing that. And I think that's what really stuck with me when I saw everything that you were creating and doing, because I think it's funny because I think between when we first chatted and now, I did like a small snippet of a video on like my experience, because I've been laid off as well too. And I don't think I had unpacked like the feeling. So like I was more the former than the latter of like what you felt, where I was angry, I was pissed off, I felt, betrayed, all the feelings, all the things. And I love that you started on that journey, because I think when I went through that, and I imagine a lot of people will probably go through that, you feel very isolated by yourself. You feel like you made a mistake. And I just imagine you start to snowball from there in a bad way, I imagine, if you don't let that happen, if you don't know that, it is happening a lot. It's happening to a lot of people. And frankly, you're not alone.
Yeah. Well, the daunting part is that there's so many people out there who this isn't day 1. This isn't month 3. This is year 1, year 2 of unemployment. And what I will say is prior to this, my LinkedIn, I went on it. I never posted. I actually took down all of my job history. I just had the company name and my title. I didn't put any of the details. I kept my profile very light. I didn't ask for recommendations from past employers or, managers that I had. And since then, like I've noticed this big shift in the content that I'm seeing, because originally I think it was around a lot of my alumni. That's really all I interacted with. And so I would see like my alma mater, Bryant University, and I would see anybody who like went there, what they were doing. And then very quickly, everything was Amazon does layoffs, Microsoft does layoffs, Meta does layoffs. It was layoff, layoff, layoff. And I was like, I have to take that with a grain of salt, because I'm seeing this because I'm interacting with it. But maybe the situation isn't that bad. It is that bad, just FYI. It's terrible. And it scares me. I think I definitely have mornings, I have late nights where I'm like, what if I don't find a job? Because I'm not at the point yet where I cannot work or I can do my own thing. I definitely need income, but I still have a little bit of a runway. So I'm good.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think like it's funny, a lot of times like on the show, I always say we shouldn't forget about the human part of business and the human part of life at that. And I think those emotions, those worries, those fears, all those things are real. And you're not isolated like when those things happen. And I think that's the really hard part. I think, you know, I approach things obviously from a business standpoint and, try to look at it from a human standpoint because I've been laid off as well too. But I also understand the business standpoint too, where sometimes you do have to restructure and do those things. But I think from what I can tell, and me having gone through that, it felt very, when I went through it, it felt very, um, unhuman, inhuman. And I think those feelings, are something that even the business owners or people that understand that they have to make shifts and changes should understand that there is a human part to that and to try to help, I think, as much as possible to make sure that that change and shift, that the human that is on the other end, is in the best place too.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, I don't think we got into it. Would you mind sharing your layoff journey of like what happened as much as you can?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So I graduated like during the economic crisis. So that was like 2009, 2010. I ended up getting a master's degree. And I always knew that I wanted to start a business at some point. But I thought I'd really get a chance to kind of like work, learn, have a mentor, a bunch of mentors, and just kind of learn like what exactly business looks like. So I won't make it too long, but I, bounced around to a bunch of different jobs after I graduated. I would go to one job, a manager would leave, and then I'm like, okay, well, I can't get any mentorship here. And I found myself bouncing around. So at one point, I found what I think was my, I don't know if it was my dream job, but I loved it a lot. And that was kind of working with kids. I have my master's in sports management. I've always loved being active and working with kids. So having my master's in that, some of the people that were in my class, like they're working for ESPN or for this, company or things like that. But because I didn't have as much of the background, I really felt in love with this, especially like working with the little ones. So that job was in a franchise. But I got this kind of vibe that the franchise wasn't stable. So I said, you know what? I want to stay here, but I don't know if this is actually going to be around. And I left. And so I found a outside sales job and, did all those things with Haibu, which had changed their name to Yellow Book. But again, went to that job, went through a 3-week training in Massachusetts, I believe, and then Burlington, Massachusetts, and then came back. And during the training, one of my managers had left. And then the second day I was in the office, the next manager left. So I was like, this isn't stable either because everybody's just leaving. So I said, you know what, at the end of the day, I'm going to go back and, have the conversation with the kids, with the sports camps and things like that and see how that goes. So I went back, had that conversation. He said, hey, things are kind of like how you left it. So we really miss you, yada, yada, yada. So I heard all those things. Took that job. 3 months later, somehow ran out of funding and money, and I kind of got downsized and was eventually going to get laid off. So that was my kind of experience. Even though, like, I kind of knew when I saw the things, I loved it a lot. I still love it, and I don't know. I just felt very dumb, honestly, by going through that because I said I knew it, but I still kind of stayed with it. And I felt like I kind of didn't have any other place. So I did that, and then I took luckily, I was able to get another job. I want to say maybe 30, 60 days later. But that job was also going to have layoffs. I could tell at the beginning. And I knew when I took it, I said that, hey, that light bulb had already went off, and I said that, hey, I'm staying with my family. Let me just see what I can do, and I'm gonna make one more push towards entrepreneurship, and that's kind of what led me there. But yeah, that's kind of like what happened for me.
Wow. I hope that's not the case here. And I hope that's not the case with a lot of other people, but I've definitely heard so many people talk about, that first layoff they have. And it's not that it leads to a second, but you almost have that fear. You kind of jump at anything. And maybe that second opportunity is a company that's about to have a layoff.
Yeah.
One theme that you touched on that I actually haven't talked about much in my podcast, but I want to get into is you mentioned, you had a great manager, but then that person left. And then you had a different manager, and then you had a different manager. And I've had plenty of cycles like that at plenty of companies that I've worked at. A large one was Amazon. I was there for 2.5 years, and I ended up having 9 different managers, which is like, wow. How can you even give me a performance review at that point?
Right, exactly.
But with that, I've gotten competing advice on one hand, people tell me managers make or break the job, which I fully agree with. If I have a great manager, it's a crappy company or a crappy job, I'll stay. I like it, right? My manager's great. If I have a bad manager, I'm going to jump ship because I either jump teams or jump companies. But I also get the advice that says, don't go to a company just for a manager. And it's like, if the person who's managing me is the person who's making me stay or go, but you're telling me not to go to a company for a manager because they could leave, how do you find a good job?
Yeah,
And in your experience
absolutely.
or people you've spoken with, have you heard any themes out there of like ways that people look for jobs or look for roles that are right for them?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's such a great point. I mean, I think there's never just one. At least the way I approach it, I'll say there's never just one reason like why you kind of take. It should be why you take a position. And I think to your point, like if you have a manager and you're taking the job for the manager and the manager leaves, then it's all of a sudden like, okay, why am I here? But I think for me, very early on, I mean, I was maybe 3, 4 years or so out of school. I was very much so like, what can I learn? But I also knew that I would need to learn from people. Like I would need to have a manager there. So even though it wasn't, the best positions, like even that last job I took, it was one of those. It was. It's funny because when I was thinking about taking a job, like I already. So this was with a company called AOL, which had bought Patch. So AOL bought Patch, and I was a freelance writer when it first started. So I used to do a lot of freelance writing and things like that when I first started to dip my toes in entrepreneurship. After I graduated at least. And when I went back and I applied for that job, I took a look at the site, I took a look at the names, and I was like, wait a minute, it doesn't still seem the same. And I started to DM people and I said, hey, how's your experience here? I noticed you're not here anymore. Why are you not here? And I remember one person was like, hey, it's an outside sales position. So, double dip if you have to. And, just know this is what it is. And so I took the position, but I also took the position with my eyes open. So I was like, hey, I can still learn, on sales. If it works out, then I think it's going to help me out in my entrepreneurship journey. But at the same time, I was like, if it doesn't work out, I'm not going to be caught off guard. Like I felt like to some degree, I was there. So I would say like definitely, don't have just one reason because it's kind of like the legs of a stool. If you have only one or two legs, then that's going to be less sturdy than three or four. So if you have multiple reasons, that's always going to be helpful. But I think, and you could probably speak more to this, and I'm curious, like the people you have conversations with, do people have as many legs of the stool that they can stand on? Is it just like, hey, I have to just take this position. This is one stool I'm literally wobbling over. Do they have as much, I guess, as many options as they had in the past?
Yeah, I think there's two types of people out there, and not types because somebody's figured it out and somebody hasn't. But I have noticed there are people who maybe they have a lot of connections, or maybe they do something that's very specific that is needed, and those people. I don't want to leave out the people who also have like great names on their resume, right? Like I have found that the people who are getting laid off from like Amazon and Microsoft are finding jobs very quickly versus
Of
the people getting
course.
laid off from Joe Schmo, whatever law firm are struggling to find work a lot longer. So that name, it helps. But those people are finding jobs quickly who kind of work in those very specific places that a lot of companies like don't have a lot of people and are hiring for. AI is tough. I mean, I made a joke the other day. I was like, recruiters are out here looking for someone with 50 years of experience in AI. And it's like, come on. No one has that, right? Everyone
Right.
here is literally on the same level playing field. Everyone has
Right.
a year of experience roughly. There's experts who might
Right.
have 2 or 3 or 4, but like those people are going to cost you millions. And for your
Yeah.
$50,000 a year job, you're going to find someone who, if I know what it is, that should be enough.
Right. Yeah. That makes so much sense. And I think that like having that I guess that awareness around like what what landscape we're in and kind of like what's happening and things ends up being a big thing. But I mean like when people are going like what I guess what advice would you give for them? Because I imagine it's such a I don't know. I always it's funny doing that video not too long ago made me kind of go through like all the feelings that I had, like how do you like what advice would you give for me at that time? I'm 4 or 5 years out of school. I have a little bit of experience. I have the hunger, the desire to be better. Like what advice would you give?
Yeah, I can't focus on the current advice of like, if someone's going through a layoff right now, what would I tell them to do? Because quite frankly, I'm navigating that whole thing myself. And maybe at the
Right.
end, maybe when I'm done, maybe when I've landed the position or I've talked to enough people, I can give a better response to your question. But what I will say is, I think the perspective needs to shift rather than what do I do once I get laid off? I think it needs to be, what do I do prior to my layoff, right? For me, I didn't save. And this is, again, a controversial view. There's people out there who are going to save and be like, make sure you have 6 months, 12 months of your salary or your expenses for, emergencies, things like this. I didn't do that because I was on a debt payoff plan. I really wanted to be debt free in 1 year. And based off of the amount of money I was making at my previous company, I could have. So thank you, CrowdStrike, for laying me off. And the other thing is like, I like to live my life, right? I always felt like your 20s are for being reckless, for being crazy, and your 30s are for being the adult that you should be. And so I'm 30 now, and I feel like I'm really responsible. In fact, I just bought 3 wagons. I'm going to make this YouTube video. I bought 3 wagons, not like a G wagon, like a
Hmm.
literal pull wagon with a handle.
Uh-huh.
And I'm going to build them all, and then I'm going to like review them, and I'm probably going to return the
Nice.
2 I don't want. But I live about, I don't know, 3 blocks from a grocery store. And I was like, okay,
Mhm.
I don't have income and I'm too late. I'm lazy. Like I should really get up and start walking and exercising more. So now I'm going to walk to the grocery store like, once a week when I need something. And it will stop me from making those impulse decisions of like, just go to the grocery store
Mhm.
at midnight because I can. And it will help me kind of structure my life. But to get back to the root of the question, I think having those savings and making sure you are comfortable and understanding, you know, being prepared for anything that might happen, but also education. And that's a big one that people are missing. While you're employed, a lot of people, once they graduate school, they stop learning. And knowledge is power, right? If you don't learn, you're wasting, right? And I think you can learn in multiple different ways. There's your job, and you should absolutely learn your job. But there's also the aspect of like education and going and getting courses and going Coursera and Udemy. And I didn't do that stuff. I think I got 3 certifications over my work, 9 years of work. I got my Six Sigma yellow belt when I first graduated college. And then I got a certified Scrum Master through my last company. And then during this layoff, when I first started, I was very anti, if you don't have income, you should be spending that on up leveling yourself because you're just wasting your money. And I'm still that mode of thought. However, I understand that like in order to get the job, you do have to have those differentiating factors. But this goes back to my point. If you knew what candidates had, let's say I'm a marketer, I'm just like a regular, I don't know, marketing analyst or something. And I could see right now while I'm employed that 80% of people have some marketing, certification. I could get that certification and then I could go and get other certifications that are maybe only 10% of marketers have, but is super
Mhm.
relevant. And it kind of differentiates yourself. I think if people have that knowledge today while they're gainfully employed, it would make a huge difference for when you are laid off. And then we could talk about those next steps you take.
I love that advice, and it's such a huge thing. And I think to being able to kind of understand that, like one of the reasons, like I started everything because I started the franchise brokerage, and a lot of people that are thinking about different opportunities outside of getting a job, or maybe just exploring, kicking the tires, whatever it might be. They might look at something like this that's a little bit more of a ready-made solution, but I remember that I reached out to somebody and I DM'd, and he was dead set on like, hey, I want a job, and I understand it. And he's like, hey, do you have any advice? What would you do? And it's funny, like the advice that I gave is advice that I feel like what you're doing, and I also think is in line with what you just said, where I'm a marketer. Like I feel like I say everybody is a media company. You're in the media biz. You create content and information for the people you want to serve, whether it's a podcast, blog, whatever it might be, newsletter, whatever you want to do. But that, to me, from my perspective, is what helps you break through the noise, because you're not just coming in saying that, hey, I could do X, Y, and Z. You're actually doing X, Y, and Z and A, B, and C, and you're showing that. So when you come in, it makes you a little bit more, helps you stand through the pack a little bit more. So I guess from what you've seen, do you find that do you find that there's a lot of people that are doing this, one, and then two, what like kind of compelled you, like what in your like background or something says that, hey, I'm going to do this podcast? I feel like I don't see it a lot, and I imagine you probably have a little bit more perspective, even though you say you might be lazy. I feel like it does take a lot of work and time to even do and create this podcast.
Yeah. I'm lazy in the sense that if my fridge could be right next to me, I would love that. I'm not lazy in the sense of my work ethic, right? I love to have my hands on a lot of different things. But that being said, I don't think the time when you get laid off is the time when a lot of people decide to make that leap into something new and exciting. I think the time when you're complacent, when you have the cushy job and the cushy income, that's when people tend to like test it out. That's my mode of thought, right? I've done multiple different, what I'll say is failed businesses or failed ideas that I've had. And I've spent a lot of money because I had the expendable income. Now that I don't, it's annoying because I feel like I'm sitting on this awesome business idea and opportunity. And I'm looking every day and I'm like, man, this idea would help this person. This idea would help this person. It would help everyone, and job seekers specifically. And I don't have the money to do it. And I'm like, this is unfortunate. So the podcast is my way of, one, I've always wanted one. I just don't know what I would talk about. I don't want to be like interviewing celebrities. That's not fun for me. So I like that this idea of like helping people and being part of the conversation. And I'm not an expert, right? I'm learning from all of these people and the things they're going through. And we have one common theme. Anybody who's been laid off, right? We can share. And anybody who hasn't, we've been employed. So I can relate with just about anybody on my podcast. Though what I'll say is I wish more people did it. I wish more people stepped out to try something new. I will say, I think I've noticed a lot of people on LinkedIn lately documenting a portfolio of work and dabbling in YouTube videos, which I think is amazing. I think about missed opportunities a lot, and there's two that come to mind. One was YouTube, right? I wasn't a YouTube kid growing up, which for anybody who's not over the age of like 28 probably doesn't know what that means. But like a YouTube kid is someone who is comparable to an iPad kid today, right? We spent all of our time on YouTube because it was like all of a sudden there was easy access to all of these videos of anything that you could think of. And there was no shortage of videos that needed to be made. Like if you wanted to be like, I'm going to build a house today or a tree house, there could be 5 other videos. There wasn't that many. There was enough that you could see it, but there wasn't enough that it was like saturated in the market. And so I definitely grew up watching a lot of famous YouTubers at that time. And I'm sad that I never did it. I tried like 2 videos with a friend and we just didn't stick with it because it was like, oh, we got 3 views. And what does that mean? My podcast got 3 views. And I was like, yes. That's not just my mom. Thank God. Like, I'm doing great. And now I get over 100 views and it's only been a month, which maybe isn't a lot for some people, but to me, 100 people in this small room, right, with me would be insane. So thank you to all 100 people. And then, I think the other thing is like, it's never too late just to get started and document these things and get out there. The other train I missed was TikTok. I used to dance in my underwear and like a big sweater when I was, it would have been 2016, 2017. And then TikTok came out and I had just moved to Seattle, Washington for a job at Amazon. And everyone was like, please tell me you're on TikTok. And I was like, no, that's super cringy. I would never do that. And then I see people like, what's her name? Charlie D'Amelio, who is one of the most followed, if not the most famous person on TikTok because she danced. Essentially, not in her underwear, but pretty much. And I'm like, would I be as famous as her? No, and I don't want to be. But I could have had a substantial following, and my life could be very different right now. So, those 2 trains left, and I was not on them. But I'm on this one.
Yeah. There you go. There you go. And I love it. And I think that it is good that you had like those entrepreneurial seeds because you start to see that there's opportunities kind of everywhere. But I too kind of kick myself over things that I do. And I forgot what got really popular around during the pandemic is like the audio social media
Mhm.
network where people were chatting and you can literally just send messages. You can hop in a room with somebody else and literally like have conversations. But I didn't have an iPhone, so it was only on iPhone. I'm an Android guy, for better or worse. I always like to die on that hill. But I think that was one of the things that I wish that I had done during the pandemic because things could be different. But I feel like there's no shortage. Anytime you do select something that you're going to do, you have to say you're saying no to other things. And there's definitely a lot of opportunities. But I wanted to go back to what you said around the sometimes the best time to do that is sometimes the best time to try something out is when you are kind of like a little bit more stable. But we have this like entrepreneurial assessment. So we'll take people through, it takes like 20 minutes or so, and it finds out like what type of the psychology of the franchise you would be a fit in. But one of those things that it shows is like your comfort zone. And funny enough, what I found by taking this is sometimes it will show that people have a larger comfort zone sometimes if they're in a less stable environment versus somebody who's in a more stable environment has a smaller comfort zone. So it's funny. I think a lot of it has to do more with people and like hearing a little bit more about your background kind of sounds like you dabbled and did lots of things. You're willing to kind of explore that. So it probably makes sense that you did decide to do that where somebody else is a little bit more like, well, that larger comfort zone. I don't want to do anything new. I just want to do what I've been doing. And that's all that is going to take me where I want to be.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it sounds like maybe the audiences are a little bit different, right? Because I don't want to be a franchise owner. And if
Mm-hmm.
I was, to your point, I probably would be more on that, like, things are unstable and I want that. And now I'm ready to make that jump or I'm ready to try versus like building a platform, building a business, a service, a product from the ground up isn't someone handing you a playbook saying, here's how you're successful and here's a network of people. It's typically like, okay, you've heard about Y Combinator, you've heard about seed funding, you've heard about angel investing. How do you even get from I have an idea to going in front of these people and saying, I want millions of dollars because this idea is amazing and here's a prototype and like that's really tough to do. And those who have done it, that's amazing because I've tried so many times, I feel like at this point, but still haven't quite gotten that yes. But it's all about the person. My mom would never, right? My mom's the type of person to be like, if I didn't ever have to work, but somebody else was doing all of it for me and just giving me money, sign me up and I'll go be like a librarian.
Yeah, that's the big thing around like being able to kind of invest. But like to your point, I think that's what makes it different. That's why I like that test because I think what you find is that there's some people that are more. I feel like the more quote unquote entrepreneurial you are, you may not even want to do a franchise. Like there's emerging brands which are like newer brands that have a little bit less like regimented. Like you have to do this way. But I think there's definitely a lot of people, and sometimes I think I'm that person too. That is, I'm less of a. I would own a franchise as my only thing that I do because I feel like I would like to like color outside the lines and do things a little bit differently. But I think that's where, being able to kind of, do assessments or just frankly just be honest about like who you are and what you want to do ends up being maybe one of the first things. Cause I think there's a lot of people that do want to start businesses, but I find a lot of people don't know how to do it. They let fear take hold and, talking about it is a lot different than actually like kind of, starting a podcast or starting a franchise or frankly anything that you can do.
It is. I laughed at in undergrad, we had a group of people, a group of kids who got together and they made this like club. It was like CEOs or something. I don't even remember the name. It has something to do with CEOs. And I was like, it's very cocky of a name. Like I love this, but it's not for me.
Yeah.
It's not, I'm not that type of entrepreneur in any way. And then you found out that a lot of the kids who were part of it, like they came from money and their parents had a ton of money. And I was like, well, it's a lot easier to start a business when you have mom and dad's money backing you up and
Yeah.
you don't have to worry about like paying the bills tomorrow. So there's kind of like this unrealistic, like I can't fail. And that's awesome for them. I always thought like entrepreneurship in university as a course was like comical because it's like I'm studying, like, let's say I was an accountant or I'm going to school for accounting. I'm taking all the generic courses first, the first 2 years, and then I'm specializing in accounting the last 2 years, but I still have to take more advanced other courses. And ultimately, I could still be an entrepreneur because I'm learning the same things. Now, obviously, entrepreneurship is going to focus on other specific aspects, but that's the thing is like, I feel like you could graduate as an accountant and be pretty successful as an accountant, regardless of the path you take. You could love it or hate it, but you could do it. Entrepreneurship, I, in my opinion, as someone who isn't or wouldn't say I'm an entrepreneur, is so much more a mindset of like, this is going to be successful. I know how to sell people. I know how to do this thing. I know how to talk about the value of my business. I know how to talk about ROI. And it's like, even if you had a crappy product though, I mean, like, you could be an entrepreneur, it could just not be successful. Like, there isn't that one playbook that allows you to just, oh, I did it. I did the steps. I'm a millionaire. So that's what's
Yeah.
scary to me about entrepreneurship.
Yeah, it's so funny. Like I love that you said it's the mindset, and one of the reasons I called the pod, there's many reasons, that I called it the I Am CEO podcast was largely because I wanted to redefine what it means to be a quote unquote CEO. And I feel like a lot of times when people hear CEO, they automatically have this definition of it. So part of like what I wanted to do on the show is to have different size businesses, different guests, people that even weren't quote unquote CEOs or they were employees or whatever on the show, even if they were just creators or whatever, however we define itself. I wanted to kind of, you know, change that narrative on what it meant to be a CEO or an entrepreneur or
Mhm.
business owner. And it's so funny. Like, I love that you said that mindset piece because I think you try to, I think the Einstein quote is that see further, you stand on the shoulders of giants. So you try to see like what people are doing, how are they doing, and you try to implement that. And I think seeds of that are unfranchising. But I think what ends up happening is I feel like entrepreneurs at the heart of it are problem solvers. And sometimes the problem is just like, how am I going to build and scale this? And I think if you realize, like, hey, I'm really great at numbers, I'm an accountant, I do numbers, I don't do sales, I don't do any of that stuff, but I have this problem. I want to get out to more people. Maybe I'm going to find a co founder that is great at sales, or maybe I have something new. So I feel like sometimes we box in like what business owner, entrepreneur, CEO is. But I think at the heart of it, we don't forget that it's all around problem solving. You realize that, hey, I don't have to do all the things and I can find partners or things like that. And one of the other reasons that I started the podcast is because I had this lady on the show and she wrote the book One Person $1 Million Business, where, and this was like maybe 10 years or so ago. There was a growing number of people because of technology, because of outsourcing things like that, that had just, they were just one employee and they partnered or they had 1099 contractors and they grew $1 million businesses. And I also think that that plays to like, you don't necessarily have to be this to be an entrepreneur, this to be a business owner. You just have to say, I know what I am, what am I not, and how do I find those gaps so that I can fill that in?
Yeah, I think visionary is an important word that comes to mind because
Yeah.
the people that I've met who've done this, they don't have all the knowledge. They don't necessarily solve the problem, but they're a visionary and they're like, well, what if this was a solution? What if this could
Hmm.
be? And I think about a lot of the times in interviews with companies, they'll ask me like, what separates me from the pack, or, why did I choose to do this thing? And why do I want to work for this company? And I always tell them a similar answer is about like, when I was younger, when I was 2, when I could start talking, the biggest question in my mouth was why? Why does this do this? Why does this work? Why do we do this thing? Why did you respond this way? Everything. And I have a degree in psychology as well. And I love to know the way that people's brains work and like why, my mom loves to eat food and put her dish next to the sink versus me who eats food and washes the dish immediately. Like, why are we different? Why are we prioritizing things differently? And then what does that speak to the rest of our lives, right? When you look at everything that we've done, there are fundamental differences between the person who eats their food and leaves the dish next to the sink, someone who could be classified as a procrastinator, versus someone who is more type A and gets things done right now because you don't want to do it in 5 minutes, because who knows where your brain or your focus will be in 5 minutes. So I think that visionary aspect of being able to see hey, this is where I want to get. This is where I am today. I don't know if I have the skills to get in between that. So I need to go find someone to help me do that, right? I need to go do these things super well. And then in the future, I can worry about these problems. Like that visionary mindset is also super important.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. And Dre, I would say too, like I do think you have entrepreneurial tendencies. You may not say you do. I definitely think you do because it's so funny. One of the things I wrote down is like, and I say a lot on my podcast, is that curiosity. And I think what happens is, I always say on the show, like, there's a lot of things that we're using right now as far as technology that people thought of and said, like, I want to create this, and people laugh at them. And we're literally using it right now today.
Yeah.
But it takes those people that are curious, are able to say, like, why do I wash the dish and my mom doesn't, or my brother doesn't, whatever it might be. But I think it's the entrepreneur that says that I'm going to go out and try to solve that, or I'm going to, ask those questions, or I'm going to create those things. I think that's really the only difference. And I think if you don't lose that, 2-year-old why, I think we lose that for whatever reason. Like, we start to take the world and life as it is. It's like, this is the way it is. It's the way it always will be. But I think the quote unquote entrepreneurial person starts to say, why can't I do it another way? Like, why can't I do a podcast and get a job? Why can't I, start this or start that? And I think those are the people that, frankly, start businesses, start things, but frankly, I think they change the world. It's like going back to that Steve Jobs, think different commercial, where you start to say, like, why can't I do it this way? Why can't I write I have a dream speech? Why can't I do all those things? And then those are the people that end up, being trailblazers and truly changing the world.
Yeah. No, honestly, I think we haven't gotten into much of what you do, and like from that typical corporate America job to what you have today, what you're doing, the several businesses or podcasts that you're running. Would you mind sharing a little bit more about that journey that you've taken?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So I think very much so like you, Dre. I'm very much so a busybody. That's what I like to call myself more than anything else. I like to have my hands in a lot of different things. But, going back to like when I, got laid off myself, I was really, beating myself up and saying, I made a mistake and all those things. And I always, I basically leaned into my interests. So to go even further back, when I was 10 years old, I started like a family newspaper. My dad was in the military, so he went to an entirely different country. And it was just me and my mom. So I like boohooed, cried, like taking him to the airport because he was going away for the year. And, used to play basketball, do all the things with him. And so I eventually started what became that family newspaper because we didn't have Skype, FaceTime, like all these ways that we can instantly connect with people. We literally had a care package each month we would send over to my dad. We would put honey bunches, all those things in. But I also started this family newspaper. So I would cover things that were going on in my family. So, there's a squirrel that got into my grandma's kitchen, so I featured that. There was my cousin that got born. He was like the lead story of that newspaper. So my mom kept all these because I did it for like 2 years. But the reason I bring that up is because when I was like going through those challenges and I'm like, what am I doing? Like, who am I? Like all those questions that we always ask. I went back to that 10-year-old Gresh because he wasn't trying to do anything for any other reason than just to do them. It wasn't about getting a job. It wasn't about, getting accolades or being on podcasts or any of those things because, those things didn't exist to some degree. But those kind of laid the seeds on like what and why I do the things that I do. And frankly, even the filter of like how I do things. If I'm thinking of doing something like, hey, what would 10-year-old Gresh do? Because that to me, with all the noise of like what I should be doing, tells me more of like who I am. So, fast forward a lot of years, I, got my bachelor's actually in English. I thought I was going to go to law school. I mentioned I got my master's in sports industry management because I was just interested in those things. And, I started to just write a lot. That was my thing. So when I said, "Hey, I have entrepreneurial tendencies. I think I want to do something. I don't know what that is. I don't know what that looks like. I don't even know how to spell entrepreneurship. So let me just talk to some people. Let me interview some people." So I started to like talk with business owners, talk with entrepreneurs, say, "Hey, why'd you start your business?" Just all those things. So fast forward a lot of years, I started a blog. That blog became a podcast, and those where all those things came from. But one of the things I noticed in the journalism industry, because I really wanted to do journalism, but that industry, got destroyed because of the internet largely. there was always like a way for people to generate money and revenue and be able to kind of sustain that. And that was kind of destroying, it still is destroying like the journalism industry to some degree because everybody now has a microphone. So I started to talk with people and someone said, hey, I want to make updates on my website. I said, well, I can help you out with that. And I would start doing that. And I was like, hey, this isn't set up correctly because you want to be set up for search engines. And they were like, you know how to do that? Like, yeah. And so I started doing that. And I started to realize like that was a value I didn't even know. I was just, a geek for lack of a better term and just interested in this stuff. But that's what kind of laid the foundation for the digital marketing company. So I started to balance those two things where they started to kind of ultimately merge together. But that was about 12 years or so ago. I have a few years on you. I'm looking at 40 now. I'm on 38, looking at 40. So it was a different time, like almost a decade difference. But it was like at that same time, this is before digital marketing became that. When you did digital marketing, you literally did everything. You did Facebook, you did social media, you did websites, you did SEO. All the things were one, but it has definitely evolved and changed a lot more. But yeah, that's what kind of led me to what I'm doing. And I'm really passionate about entrepreneurship and business, if you can't tell. And I think it's a route that people um I think they should at least kick the tires and explore. And you can do it in a way that it isn't catastrophic. You can have a side hustle. You can do it on a very low resource level, and you can kind of step into that. But yeah, that's what kind of got me to everything I'm doing now.
Yeah. I mean, it's great, and it's also, for somebody who might be teetering with the idea, should I do it? Should I not? It's insightful because it's like, oh, well, this person did it. And it's not to say that it's easy, but it's like knowing somebody who did it and isn't in debt, isn't crying every single day, it makes it a little bit more alluring. And you're like, oh, maybe I could do it. Maybe I should give this thing a try. Is there any advice that you would give to anybody who might be listening to the podcast on my end of like why they should do it, or even just like the first step they should take if they've been thinking about it for a while?
Yeah. So there's a book that I got when I first started the blog. I used to do a lot of book reviews. And the blog was CO Blog Nation. And I got a book by Eric Ries or Riles. I always, stumble over how to exactly say his name, but it's called The Lean Startup. So there's this concept of MVP, which stands for minimum viable product. So all that means is that we often build up in our heads, like in order to start a business or start something, we have to literally have 100 million bazillion dollars in the bank to have that started. And, that's not true. One, and two, sometimes that could be unveiling a little bit more about our fear more than anything else. But the idea of the MVP is that you can start a business and you can get started by just taking the next step forward. And that MVP doesn't necessarily even have to be a website. It could be a questionnaire that you have. I have this idea and I want to send this out to all the people that I think are interested, and they can fill it out, and maybe I know if this is viable, and then maybe I put up a $20 website, or then I build that. So the idea is it's a lot more of a journey focus, but you're constantly testing those things out. So to anybody, definitely people, that are in your audience and saying like, hey, I think that I want to start this out, I would definitely like, look that up and explore that idea, because what you think that you need to get started is probably more than what you actually need to get started. And I would definitely encourage people to do that. And frankly, like I think in the book Dropbox, like all these big, huge companies, they have that methodology or their mentality to kind of build that out. You can even go back to like, I don't know about all the starts of Amazon.com, but I always know that picture on social media, even though I know he came from some money, if I remember correctly. But you saw like the Amazon.com in a cardboard box with permanent marker that floated around social media. So you know that he didn't have the money he has now. So you always have less than what you probably need. So then you start to become more resourceful. So I would definitely encourage, people to do that. But to your point, and that's why I love everything that you're doing. Like, I think when you hear people's stories, and that's what really has lit me up, in terms of entrepreneurship and business, is talking with other business owners, talking with other entrepreneurs. Because for me, when I started, I was like, I don't know if I could do this, but I put myself in places where it wasn't, can you do it? It was like, I'm doing it. And that's where being around business owners, being around networking groups and things like that helped out tremendously, because the narrative wasn't like, can I do it? It was like, I'm doing it. How do I succeed more? And once you change like your environment or the thing or the inputs that you're putting in, whether it's podcasts or vlog or videos or whatever it is, it starts to become real. It starts to become the standard and the default. So I would definitely encourage people to definitely do that as well too. Just be very aware of your environment. Frankly, when I started, not a lot of people, if anybody, were kind of cheering me on to kind of say do this. So being in that entrepreneurial business owner environment played a really big part to helping me like get past myself, because I think sometimes that's can be the thing that could be our biggest downfall.
Yeah, and that environment is so important. I remember back when I was in university, I struggled my sophomore year, not because I wasn't smart, because I didn't want to. I wanted to just drink. I wanted to almost be the statistic that I felt like everyone expected me to be, to fail out. And I decided to turn it around, and I was like, I'm gonna be an A+ student. And I remember the thing that like was the deciding factor, the way, not the deciding factor of like I'm gonna do this, but the deciding factor on whether or not I would actually get an A or a B in a class versus a C or a D, was where I sat in the classroom. And I didn't read a book about this, and I didn't study this. I had no idea that this was a thing. I just chose that like if I was in the front row, if I sat front and center in front of the professor, I wouldn't be able to look at my phone. I wouldn't be able to slack off. I wouldn't be able to have side conversations. I would be inclined to feel the pressure of being looked at and being like, I'm going to be expected to have the answer. It almost reduced the fact that there was 25, 30 kids behind me, and it was just me and the professor. And I remember the second semester, my sophomore year, this is when I like started doing it. I had a professor who I ended up sitting like in the second row only because the first row was taken. And it was a professor who I was like scared to take. His last name was Souza. And, you know, everyone talked about him on Rate My Professor and was like, he's a terrible teacher, but not because he's bad, but because he expects you to know, and he expects you to do the reading, and he will call on you unprovoked. Your hand's not up, doesn't matter. He has called on you. And so this man, like, I sat in his class, and the first day of his lecture, he said, I can already tell you who in this class is going to get an A, who's going to get a B, who's going to get a C. And I was like, I feel so targeted. Like, how would he know this? Is it me? Am I going to fail? Should I just quit his class now? And he's like, and I can tell you that based off of where you sat. And I was like, wait, I've been doing this. Like, oh my gosh. And he literally was like, these kids right here in the first row are going to get an A. And of course, now I'm sitting in the second row. He's like, you guys are going to get a B. You know what I graduated his class with? I literally got a B+, and I was like 0.5 away from an A-. And I was like, and he doesn't round. So I begged. I was like, is there anything I can do to get the like extra 0.5? And he was just like, nope. And I was like, but I was in his office anytime I possibly could. And so that mentality, that shift of what you had mentioned, you know, hanging out with those people who are successful, you're bound to be successful. Hanging out with the people who have jobs, you're bound to get a job. And I can imagine that hanging out with the people who are CEOs, who have thriving businesses, you're bound to be a CEO and have a thriving business. So, you know, that's true. But I wanted to ask you about like imposter syndrome, right? And there can be that feeling of like, I don't belong, and seeing all your other comrades, your friends, the people you're hanging out with, they're successful, they're thriving, and you're just sitting there like, well, my business isn't. Like, what's wrong with me? Do you ever have that?
Yeah, absolutely. Every day, every day, every day of the week, you always like have that. And it's so funny. I would love to hear the same from you, because I was thinking through like a lot of times when I was, you know, looking for jobs and I was applying for jobs, and, you know, you would see that, hey, you know, I just graduated from college. But we're looking for somebody with 5 to 7 years of experience. Like, okay, well, I don't have that, so I can't apply. I feel like that also played a big part. But funny enough, my mom, I could hear her in my ear all the time. And I still hear her now telling me the things like, why not? Like, why can't you apply for that? Why can't you have that conversation? So I feel like that imposter syndrome, you know, definitely happened, you know, to me there. And I feel like you still kind of struggle with that, because that's a very real thing. For people, I think, not even just entrepreneurs and business owners. I think especially probably for entrepreneurs and business owners, because you often are doing things that other people are not doing. So you are less likely to have that environment that is cheering you on. You're doing and going against the grain, whether you could be starting a franchise and you might have, 3,000 people that have started the same franchise, but you might literally be the only person in your family that's doing
Hmm.
that. And you have to kind of grapple with that because I think we as you probably could speak more to this from a psychological standpoint, but I think we have that fear playing a big part of who we are, and that can keep us doing the same thing because it keeps us safe. That safety can be the thing that, hundreds of years ago kept us away from bears, but now it keeps us away from applying for a job or starting a business, even though we know that we have a good idea, whatever it might be. So yeah, I mean, I definitely do have that. I think the difference though is fear, having that fear or having that imposter syndrome and taking that step anyways. I think that's the real big difference. And when I was in college and I think a little bit after college, like I had all these fears that for whatever reason, I don't know why I had them. One of them was heights. But I went skydiving to face that fear because I'm not sure where that fear came from. And, you know, it was that process for me of having a fear and facing that fear. And it started to not get away. Not I don't lose imposter syndrome. I don't lose fear, but my relationship with it has now changed because now I know I can have fear and still operate. So that's the big thing that, has happened for me. It's like me having those feelings, but not allowing those feelings to dictate like what actions I'm going to take. So that's the biggest thing that I think has helped me out for sure.
Yeah, with imposter syndrome, I'll give my perspective of it is like more times than not, you can't feel like an imposter if you're not already doing the thing. And so I've never
Mm.
been, maybe I'm a level of delusional that that is uncomfortable for some people, but I apply for the jobs. I'm like CEO of Amazon. Absolutely. I'm going for it. Why couldn't I do it?
Yeah.
Uh, but on a more like understandable level, when I am a program manager one, some people will be like, you have to be in this role for 2 years. Okay, but at 9 months, I feel like I've done enough, so I'm gonna apply for the position. And it won't be on this team because I know you've told me that I can't. And that's the thing. I'm very much of the camp that if you told me no, I'll go somewhere else. If you told me no, I'll go somewhere else. If a doctor tells me this is what I have, I'm gonna go 3 more opinions. Not because I don't want to believe you. There's with more data, you can see more concrete patterns and you can understand more. I'm never going to accept the status quo that just like, oh, you told me that I have to be poor. Why? Like, but what if I didn't have to be? Now, sometimes that's uncomfortable. When I was, my career journey salary wise, as I started my university, out of university, I made $65,000 a year in 2017. And I never thought I'd make this in my life. This is amazing. But then at
Yeah.
65, you're like, well, I'm already over the halfway point to 100. How do I get to 100? And I had a terrible manager. There was 2 of them and I absolutely hated them. And it forced me to leave. And I ended up taking a job that I made $5,000 less. But the manager was absolutely amazing. And that gave me a
Mm.
year to kind of think on things. I ended up being able to focus on a little fashion business that I started. I ended up getting into photography. I got to do a lot more of my life, but that also led me to taking the crazy leap of being like, what if I just applied to a role at Amazon and I moved from Rhode Island to Seattle, Washington? And I got the job and I was like, I know I'm going in and I'm going to be stacked against people who have years of experience over me because this was not an entry level position. And I only had at the time 2 years of post grad, maybe 3. So I was like, this was something that it's an L5. It's entry level if you've went to Harvard. It's entry level if you were in tech for the last year or 2, right? But I went and I said, okay, I'm going to outperform everyone. And I got through my first interview and I practiced. I always have flashcards on my desk, right? I had flashcards. I was constantly answering questions. I had the leadership principles memorized. I wrote out these scenarios of every behavioral question they possibly could ask me. And I was like, these are going to be the answers that I would come up with. And then I went so as far as like, when I got invited to the final round, I created 9 folders because it was a panel interview with 8 different people. I had one folder for myself. On the front page, it was going to have an appendix. And on that appendix, it had sticky notes that were color coded saying, like, here's the tabs, the sticky note that's green. The green resonates with this story. It answers these leadership principles. It has these behavioral questions. And the idea here was every person was ever going to ask me 2, maybe 3 questions if we had enough time. And then I would leave them with that folder. They could use it during the interview, but at the end, they would walk away with a folder that even if you didn't like me, you had to be reminded that you interviewed me and you had this tangible evidence of things that I did, results that I actually delivered. And I only had 3 years of experience. That's like 4 projects. And I got the
Right.
job in a area where I had never worked before. I had nothing. I had a supply chain degree, but I had never worked in transportation. And all of a sudden, I went from this person making $60,000 a year to $126,000 a year, living in Seattle, in an apartment that they paid for a few months while I looked for my own. And it was night and day. I was responsible all of a sudden for like all of these tier 2 and 3 cities, and basically saying, like, if you live in the middle of nowhere, how do we get you packages in 2 days? I studied inventory. I don't know how to do that, but I did it. And like, that's the thing. I definitely had imposter syndrome, but again, imposter syndrome means that you're already doing the thing. You're already there.
Yeah. Yeah. That's such a great perspective. And I wonder, and I love hearing that story because I think one of the things you had mentioned, and one of the words that I always say is like, I don't know if I'm the best, I don't know if the brightest, I don't know, whatever, but I'm gonna try to outwork as many people as possible. And I think that work ethic that you kind of spoke to speaks directly to that of like creating that, preparing for that. And I think even in business and getting jobs or whatever, I think I started to study a lot of people that were successful, started to read their biographies, listen to a lot of things, and you start to realize that they did more. They did those extra things. They went that extra mile, and that sometimes made all the difference. And I think that you find that so many times in, entrepreneurship and business, like the person that decides that they're going to do that, they're leaning on data, they're leaning on information to be able to make that decision. It's not just like a fly by night. And I think that sometimes business can be looked at as that. And in reality, you're trying to increase your likelihood of success and decrease that likelihood of failure. So sometimes you're leaning on things for that to happen. So I love the cards and being able to kind of color code them and be able to kind of predict those things, because at the end of the day, they say that they want people with 1 to 2 years or 1 to 5 years of experience. But what they really want is somebody that's going to come in there and get the job done, that's going to do the thing that they want to have done. And if they feel like that person is that person, then you're going to be able to kind of, get awarded that. So I wanted to ask you, because like a lot of times on the show, like we'll have people that are called accidental entrepreneurs, accidental CEOs, and people like that, may have gotten laid off and they decide to start a business or whatever that might look like. But I think we don't realize that sometimes starting a business is a forever thing. Sometimes it's not a forever thing. Sometimes people want to go back into the workforce. Like what, advice or information like would you have for somebody that may be in that boat and said that, hey, I started this business because I had to feed my family. I had to do these things for my family, but I want to go back into business. I want to go back into getting a job. I want to go back into the workforce. I don't want to have these gaps there. Like, what things have you seen, or would you kind of tell somebody like that might be listening to this?
I mean, I feel like that one's easy. Just apply, right? Like,
Just
why
like,
not? Why not just see what happens? I will say one thing that I haven't struggled necessarily to learn, but it's taken me a little bit of time to like understand why it's relevant, is the difference between titles and pay. And I could imagine that someone who was a CEO of their own business might be a little bit of like a level snob. I don't know. I'm trying to use like a good word,
yeah,
not swear, but like a level snob. And, they were a CEO and now they're going from a CEO to, a program manager or a marketer. And it's
right.
like, ugh, like my title was everything. It was my identity when I was a CEO, or maybe I still am on the side, but I also want this other job. And it's like, I just recently had a friend who, he was offered a senior manager position of engineering at this really amazing company that we'll probably be hearing more about in the future, because I wouldn't say the next big thing, but they have a lot of really amazing people and investors there. So they're doing great things. And when he was offered this position, I think they offered him salary wise, like I want to say 80,000 below what he expected. And they said, well, here's the thing, like because of your experience, because of your interview and everything, we can bring you in at this number, but that's as a senior manager. So like, that's such a great title. And he was like, okay, but I'm looking for this number. And they were like, well, we can give you like 60 grand more, and then we could promote you into that senior manager level if you're willing to come in as just a manager one. And he was like, yes, because I don't care about my title. I care about my pay. And, you know, that's the number that I want to be at. And plus, you're telling me that I can get a promotion, which means in a shorter amount of time, he can make substantially more money. And so I think that's the big thing. It's like, don't worry about the title as much. If you are as a CEO and you're just looking for money and you have time, you have a runway where you can kind of be a little bit of a snob and play around with like, how much money are you looking to make and what's comfortable? You don't just have to take any job. Go and look for those opportunities where you're like, you understand the pay band, you understand what people are looking for. I struggle with this whole, how much money do you want to make? Because in my entire life, university, post-grad, going through the working force, even the things that I work on, not once have I ever been told or have the experience of projecting how much I should make in a position that I'm doing. And every time I have done this, by the way, where I'm like, I'm going to talk to my boss because I feel like I should be making more money for the things that I'm doing, I'm told, nope, that's not your place. Sit down. That's not your decision. You don't have that knowledge. The business determines what you make. But yet on interviews, and I saw a very controversial post the other day that I wrote a whole reply to, and then I was like, I don't know if I want this digital footprint. But, you know, this person was just like, I don't ask you, you know, I decline applicants who apply to my position who ask for too much money. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Don't ask me how much I want to make. If you're going to say, sorry, that's too much, why don't you tell me what the options are? Or a better way for somebody else who wants to go, you know, invent this before I do, while you're interviewing, every round that you have, you should just be transparent with the candidate of like, based off of this interview, here's the range that we are targeting you at. And that should narrow down into essentially your final number that they're willing to pay you based off of how you interviewed. That's what it should do. And it should be two-sided. It should be like, from the employer side, it should be a range. And from the candidate side, it should be a narrowed down number. And so when I come back and I say, hey, I actually was expecting at least 10,000 more than this, the employer side can go, that's within our range. Perfect. Yeah. And not like this broad 90,000 to 300,000. And it's like, this is asking for 3 years of experience. Who is getting 300 grand for this? And why isn't it me?
Yeah. That makes so much sense. And I love that kind of idea and that perspective, because like you can start to, you know, with all this technology that we have, start to automate a lot of those things. But, you know, and I don't know if this is like more mindset than anything else, but I think that there's obviously the pay part that you have to, you know, have that conversation about if you're looking for an employer. But I wonder too, like, is there a narrative, or maybe this is just my head because I haven't been in the workforce in that way in a while, that if somebody is an entrepreneur, has been working for themselves for a long period of time, that they're not employable, that they're going to be an issue? Do you think that that's just like a false narrative
I
that's
hope
out there, or just
so.
something that's floating around my
I'm
head?
not a hiring manager, and I realistically never want to be one. But that to me is terrible, because maybe there's this perception, and maybe there is data that says like someone as an entrepreneur is less susceptible to following the cultural norms and like following the status quo. That I could see, right? Because you did your own thing. You're like, no, I can step on my own. I'm comfortable with ambiguity. I can do these things. And a manager might be like, well, I'm struggling to manage you because you're not following my direction, and now I have to micromanage you. And it's like those types of things. I could see that. But at the same time, like, if you were willing to step out on your own and be an entrepreneur and do your own thing, I would think that's a change agent. Why wouldn't you want that person at your business? Because that person is someone you're not going to have to monitor. That's someone who's going to go, and they know how to run their own business. They definitely know how to run a project. Like, sure, there's going to be feedback. There's going to be, you know, things that you need to help them with that say like, hey, at this place, at this business, this is how we do this thing. But like, to me, that's a great person to have on the team. Now, maybe a whole team of people like that, maybe not. Yeah. But one or two people like that to fill a role, absolutely. Why not?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it's funny on the flip side, like from a franchise broker standpoint, that's where a lot of franchises are looking for people like that, especially the established brands, because usually you have more of a playbook. So people in the military, people that have been in corporate America for a long period of time, usually you're there because you've been able to kind of execute, and like not necessarily a person that's creating a startup, because usually you have to say like, I don't have anything, let me just figure it out from there. But I think those people that are able to come through and execute, which is, very few people can execute. A lot of people can talk about what they do, but very few people on a consistent basis can kind of get those things done. So when you show that, that ends up sometimes being like a really great fit there as well too.
Yeah. No, I mean, I'd fully agree with that. So hopefully that's not holding people back, but it's sad that we're in a world where, and this is like our entire life, right? One thing we didn't fully touch on was like, I don't like to bring it up often because like I don't like to think that this is true, even though it is true. I just don't like to think about it or remember that it's true. But this idea around diverse, right, minorities, different background candidates have a different start in the race. And, you know, there's this term out there, Black excellence, right,
Hmm.
around in order to be equal with your peers, you have to be great. And and
Right.
and you can't just do what they did. You have to go so much
Right.
higher. And I like to think about the fact that when I got a Mercedes, my first Mercedes when I was 20, 22, I was like, I'm
Mm-hmm.
gonna go, and it was used. Like it wasn't a brand new car, but it was like 2 years old. And I was like, I want this
Hmm.
C class. Like it's to me, it was everything. And I was
Yeah.
driving around and the looks I got, like I felt like I was living on top of the world. Everybody looked at me. I had a beautiful like white C class and it turned heads. Old men, young men, women, anybody, they would be like,
Hmm.
wow, I really like your car. And I was like, thanks. Like I'm a badass. And I remember like one time I was at a post office and this old guy gets out of his car and he's staring at me. And I'm in New England, like I grew up there, but like you
Hmm.
never know if someone's gonna be racist. So I was nervous and I was like,
Right.
oh God, he's gonna like attack me because some people say it, right? And
Mhm.
the thing before I tell you what he said, the thing that I got a lot was if a white boy who is driving this exact same car drove it, the perception that so many people had was, wow, congrats. Good job, you did
Yeah.
the thing.
Hmm.
But for me, it was, oh, who bought that for you? How are you able to afford
Mm.
that? My boss at the
Yeah.
time, literally, when he found out that I bought it, he's like, I'm paying you too much. I don't know how you're able to afford. And I said, that is like such a messed up view because you have no idea.
Yeah.
One, you don't know if my parents bought it for me. You have no idea my
Yeah.
background. You don't know if I have a trust fund that I'm doing this job for fun. But because I'm black or I'm perceived as not white, you
Hmm.
automatically assume that I couldn't have just earned this or I couldn't have saved for this and I couldn't have been successful enough. So what this man said to me, which was like so amazing, kind of squashed all of that. And I'm walking into this post office and he's just like, hey, he's like, how do you like your C class? And I was like, it's a great, I love it. It's a great car. And he's like, I've been looking at getting the GLC for my wife. And he's just like, we talked probably for 20, 30 minutes. This guy who's older, who didn't judge me, at least not in a negative way, based off of my car. He didn't sit there and go, you can't afford it. I probably couldn't at the time, but I did. you know? And that was kind of the idea of like, it's the same thing as like when you sit in the seat, when you sit in the front row of the classroom, when you surround yourself with these people, by driving that car, it gave me this level of like delusional confidence that I
Yeah.
was amazing. I could do the things. And I feel like I did and made really great decisions because of it. And now I drive much different cars. I would think that I've leveled up, but who knows?
Yeah, but I think that plays such the big part in it. I've always heard the phrase, and I'm sure you could probably speak to that. Is like, don't I don't know if you know if it's true. Like, don't dress for the job you had, dress for the job you
Yeah.
want, or something along those lines. And how that does on a psychological level start to become a part of like who we are. But I love that you brought that up, because I think that also played a really big part for me. Like even seeing people that were around me, family members going through job struggles, maybe experiencing layoff or just getting pushback. I also fast forwarded myself. I said, I don't think I'm any better than, this person. And they're experiencing that, and they're twice my age? What if I have, wife, kids, all those things, and this same thing happens to me? I get laid off again. Like, where, how do I approach that? But yeah, I think that's part of something that I was told at a very young age is like, you want to be, if people are working 2 times as hard, you work 4 times as hard to get, to get farther than they are. And I think that that's definitely a part of being, Black and African American, and just those narratives, because sometimes, sometimes I will say, I think that that can help you to kind of fuel that work ethic, fuel that desire to get farther. But I think that there's sometimes a narrative that is not true, that is made up. And to your point, like, I actually had something that happened yesterday where I was at the pool with my, I was getting a pizza and meeting my wife and my kids. And I walked by the guy and he was like, where are you going with that? And he's like, are you delivering that? It's like, no, I'm not delivering that. I'm going to the pool. Like, I can go to the pool here. And I was telling my wife that, and my wife was like, "Oh, there's a party over there, so they actually are waiting for a pizza." But I was like, in my head, I'm like,
Yeah.
"Well, I can be there, but I literally stayed there to make sure that they did get pizza, because I said, hey, I want to make sure I'm actually wrong." But I think to that point, like, those things don't come from nowhere. Those things become because somebody did discriminate against somebody that had that C class. Somebody did say, "Oh, you're delivering the pizza. You can't be going in the pool. You don't have the opportunity." So all those things come from somewhere, but they're not always the case. But I think that they can, at the end of the day, like, fuel, that work ethic, that desire to be better. And, when used in a constructive way, I guess it can be definitely helpful. But I think it's a narrative that, from a job standpoint, there are different percentages based on races.
Mhm.
There are different levels of success for people that are in entrepreneurship based on race. And I think that's where, that narrative needs to happen a lot more, because I think if we ignore that fact, then we're just not doing ourselves um, that service as a world, because the diversity is not just a race thing. It definitely includes that, but it's the diversity in thought, diversity in experience, just all those things that we get so close-minded of, like, I'm this way, the person that's applying for this job has to be this way, or I'm this way, I only do business with the people that look just like me and talk like me and think like me. Then what are we really doing, as a world and as a
Yeah.
culture?
It took me a long time to wear sweatpants every single day. And it goes off of that, right? I used to dress all the time for the job that I wanted. I would
Yeah.
wear, again, these, I haven't thought about these things in a very long time, because I got to a place where I don't have to, where I can wear sweatpants every single day. But but to get there, I remember going through university, and I went to business school. I went to a private business school, and for the first time in my life, I had to have a suit. And I remember calling my family and being like, I can barely afford the school, guys. How am I going to afford a suit? And they helped me the way that they could. And they, sent me money, and they took me shopping, and they got me my first suit, which was like, I don't even know what they're called. Like Van Heusen, I think is what that's what I used to
Yeah.
be obsessed with. And we had a little outlet in my hometown in Vermont. And I used to go to that store all the time being like, wow, these are such nice clothes, not knowing that right next door was Brooks Brothers, which was substantially nicer. And I used to go in there and like browse and like touch the coats and like be like, man, what I wouldn't give one day to have a Brooks Brothers sports coat. That was like me making it. And my first semester, even my first, I think it was like the first month of university, I was a freshman, and I had worked this event with the Chinese Institute because I was studying Chinese at the time. And there's this thing called Waterfire in Providence, Rhode Island, which if you're ever in that area, for anybody who's listening, you should go to it 'cause it's awesome. And it happens during the summer. So I was at the Waterfire. I was taking pictures for the, Chinese Institute that I was working with in my school. And the president of my university was like going and lighting the first fire. Like it was like part of the tradition, because I think we were hitting a certain milestone of years that the school had been open. And I was standing right next to him, and he was getting on the boat, and he looked at me and he's like, do you go to Bryant? And I was like, yeah, I'm here. I had like a badge. I was like, yeah, I'm taking, pictures. He's like, can you hold my blazer? And I was like, it's not my job. Sure. It's not my job, but sure, I'll help you out. But I had to get back to my post. So I was like, I'll hold it. And I didn't realize he was going to be on the water for like 2 hours. So I walked back to where I was working, and I was like, maybe he'll walk by the street that I'm working on and he'll like see me and I can give him his jacket. He didn't. So I just had this jacket. And I remember I went back to my dorm room with my roommate, and I was like, he's like, why do you have a blazer? I was like, dude, you'll never guess, this is the president of our college's blazer. And he's like, why do you have that? And I was like, it's not what you think. He gave it to me because he's lighting the fires and like, I don't know what to do. Am I supposed to just like bring it back to his office? And he's like, yeah. So of course I took a bunch of pictures in this oversized blazer because I thought it was so funny. And I was posting on Instagram and everyone was like, why do you have his blazer? And I was like, because I can, like, I'm such a badass. And so I bring it back and he wrote me, I got like an email, that's what I have it. And he sent an email, said, could you come back to my office? I have something for you. And I was like, oh yeah, sure. So came to his office and he did like an exchange. Cause I think I emailed them saying like, I have the blazer, you know, whatever. He wrote me a card talking about like the integrity that I had as a student. He's like, this is exactly the people we want to see at Bryant, whatever. I think he gave me like $20. And I was like, ah, man, like this is amazing. But his assistant or his like right-hand man at the time, he was like, I want to talk to you because like, you know, he's the president. He gives the you know, politician speech. I want to thank you and I want to like go above and beyond. And he ended up giving me my first ever Brooks Brother blazer. And I was
awesome.
like, this is like a $500 jacket. Like, are you kidding me? And like, it was amazing. And since then, I think I have like 25 different blazers. I still have that blazer. I will have that until the day I die because I like, I loved that kind of story of like how it got me to this dream that I had. And I accomplished that and I achieved that thing very quickly, which kind of led to me always thinking like, I can set my, you know, my eyes on the highest prize and I can get there somehow. It might not happen tomorrow. It may not happen, you know, in a year, but I'll get there eventually.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that story. And especially like, again, like how you have the vision of it and then it starts to become a reality. And sometimes, you know, a lot of times when we have these visions or these opportunities that we want, they can come differently than we sometimes expect them to come. I'm sure when you were saying, I want this, you weren't ever thinking that the president of this university is going to be able to hand you the jacket as you're holding it. But those things happen because, you know, you have to show up, you have to do those things. But I wonder, like, I know around entrepreneurship and business, I heard it very early on when I started, and I, you know, didn't pay as much attention to it as that mindset piece. From a job seeker's perspective, I mean, I think there's a lot of people that say that, hey, I do want to make X amount of dollars, but in the same breath, I can say that, well, I don't know if I can really get a job for that amount, or am I really that talented? Like, do you find anything, or do you see anything, or have you seen anything, or have you experienced anything, I should say, around like what that looks like how people can kind of cultivate that mindset, or maybe even be aware of like when they are kind of minimizing their opportunities to be as successful as they
Yeah,
can?
I think that safe route, right, is what a lot of people tell us, especially if you're a first generation college student like myself. I think I'm a little bit of an anomaly because I don't have first generation college student mindset. I don't play the safe route. I don't take the job just because it's a job. I'm like, that's not what I want. I see it, I want it. That's what I'm going to go get, right? But like with that in mind, I think a lot of my peers at university, you know, we went and studied business, but it's largely working in supply chain, accounting, finance. It's not working in tech. And tech was really an industry that was like booming at the time that I graduated. And you all of a sudden had this FANG acronym of these huge companies that are on the East or on the West Coast. So I'm on the East Coast and it's like, how do I go and get into Amazon or Facebook or Google? And I think we only had a handful of the 50,000 people or something who have graduated from my university. There was only like a handful that got into these companies. And I'm happy to say that I was one of the first Amazonians, right, who was there. I think there was like 17 of us total when I finally created the group that was like, this is for the Bryant alumni. But I've seen that number continue to grow. I just saw one of my, you know, peers who was a couple years younger than me. Now he's working at Apple. I think taking that jump and understanding, you know, what type of industry you work in really can help determine where that salary cap kind of is. So if you're working as a job right now, and I have a friend who's doing this, I think she's like a financial analyst 3. Love her to death. We talk multiple times a week. And she's going through a bit of a hardship right now with her job and her managers, and she wants to leave and she wants to like jump ship to a different team, which Of course, I encourage that because I'm like, your manager sounds like a twat. But that being said, we also are very transparent about salaries. And I'm not sure if she's hit the 100,000 mark yet. But
Hmm.
with that being said, she also has like two master's degrees. She wants to go get her MBA. She's an academic. She's a scholar. It's the smartest human being I know. Like, I love it. But like, she hasn't hit the 100K mark. And I was like, I did that 5 years ago. Like,
Mhm.
that safety of staying in that one job, does it pay off in the end? I'm not sure. And she talks about it. She wants to take that leap, but there's that kind of first generation college student doubt of like, but that's risky. I'm getting like a
Right.
25% company match on my 401k right now. Why? I think it's 17%. Why wouldn't I just stay here? And I'm like, are we putting money in a 401k? I just started doing that and I'm 30. Like, I didn't know we were doing that. Oops. So I think it's different, but I would say definitely look at the industry, look at those caps. And if you want to make a lot of money, tech or like high ticket sales is probably your best options.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But so what kind of takes you through that mindset piece though? Like how does your friend, how does she is it just talking with you? Is it having that environment as we talked about? Is that what's gonna I don't want to say flip the switch, but you know, she's always gonna be that first generation college student. Like how do you change that? How do you change that mentality? How do you change that? It's like that it's that gratitude, the double-edged sort of gratitude where you want to be thankful for what you have, but at the same time, you don't want to not strive for more or not ask for more, or frankly, sometimes ask for what you actually are worth because you might be getting less than your worth. Like,
Yeah.
how do you
Yeah, I
navigate that?
think there's that saying out there that seeing is believing, which is absolutely true. But I also take it a step further and just say, like, experiencing leads to doing. And when you can show them not just, oh, I did this thing, but you can, like, hey, come to my house. Let me take you on a tour of the company that I work for. Let me show you the work, the projects that I'm doing. That experience of, wow, wait, I do the same thing and you're making 50,000 more than me to do the exact same thing. It kind of opens people's eyes, not to mention that networking, right? I didn't have
Yeah.
anybody at Amazon when I applied. I was cold applying to jobs. I got one interview at a random job I didn't get selected for. And at the time, they did the thing they said they would. They said, we'll keep your resume on file. We'll share it for other jobs. They did that. And it got me the first interview. And I knew that this opportunity doesn't come very often. So I needed to ace that. But once I was in, that's now a referral for any of my peers, for anybody who went to my alma mater, for anybody who was like, I've always wanted to work at Amazon, but I didn't know anyone there. Now they know someone there. And so for 2 years, I would refer anybody who went to my alma mater. I mean, I would, vet them first, but I
Of
made as
course.
many referrals as I possibly could because I think one day when I look for a job again, that was something that I was like, that's what I'll want. And it's crazy. I didn't keep in touch with a ton of people during university or after university. And when I posted my layoff story on LinkedIn, the amount of people who we had one class together, we talked in the hallways, we went to a few parties together that came out of the woodworks and were like, I work at this great company. I work at this great company. I work at this. I was like, wow. Like, they're like, I'll refer you. I've watched your journey. You were willing to refer me back in the day. I'll refer you now. Like, that power of
Mm,
your network is so
yeah.
important.
Yeah, and a lot of times, I was part of a networking group, and one of the networking groups, the phrase is always "givers gain," and I think you don't give so you can take necessarily, but sometimes if you operate that way throughout your entire life, you never really know who that person might be that can refer you or can give you that opportunity or how people are connected like that. That's the other kind of crazy thing around, when you get that web of connections that you sometimes see on LinkedIn where you have your first, second connections or whatever. You're like, how do you even know this person? It's like, oh, well, we sat on the bus together when we were 10. It's like, how does that happen? I didn't know, this CEO or this business, whatever it might be. But I think that's the power of operating and showing up good and being like of service and giving, to people. I think that plays such a big
Yeah,
part.
no, it does. And I've met some amazing people, even while I was at companies that I worked at, that like my first job was at CVS Health. And I had this woman, her name was Michelle Wen. She took a chance. She was like, during my interview for the internship, she was like, you're going to get the job. And I was like, you're my first interview. She's like, doesn't matter. I like you. And I'll tell the other two and I will make sure that you get the job. And she messaged me on LinkedIn after the interview and she said, hey, by the way, don't posted anywhere yet, but you got the job. And I was like, really?
Yeah.
She's like, yep, you reminded me so much of my brother. And I loved your story. And we talked about like my sexuality the whole time. I don't even think I interviewed. I don't even think I like said things about the job. And that first kind of like take was like, wow, because anyone can do the job, in my opinion, unless you're maybe like a software developer. Anyone can do the job. So a lot of the times you want to hire for that personality, for what a person would bring.
Yeah.
And through her, I ended up, while working at Amazon, this director of like Prime Video came over and she was like, oh, you should meet this woman. And I was like, how do you know her? She's like, oh, she used to work at CVS like way back in the day, but we go way back. Like, you should just go meet her. And I met her, and she ended up having like job openings, and I was able to like refer somebody to her team who ended up getting a job. So like, it's crazy how just a small conversation, this person who took a chance on me, can really grow your network. And then you do that. You give back when you can in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And it starts to, propel, and, again, you never know, like, we sometimes get so locked in, like, I'm literally on this journey, but so is everybody else. And a lot of times that weaves, and there's connections and opportunities and things from there. So I know we didn't touch on this a little bit, but I would love to hear a little bit more on like how you're connecting with people, hear a little bit more on like what we can hear on your podcast and those conversations that you're having
Yeah.
there.
Well, first of all, I would say I tried this time, not that I've done podcasts in the past, but I've done businesses in the past. And I tried this time to not have anybody that like I know on my podcast. Like, I didn't reach out to my alma mater this time and go, hey, could you come? Because it's like, for me, it was like, that's the same network. It's the same group of people. And
Yeah.
while that's lovely, and I hope they hear it one day, I think they need to branch out, and I need to kind of set the example of what I'm trying to say in the world, which is like, it's 2025. We have LinkedIn, we have Facebook, we have TikTok. You can meet anybody in the world. So just meet
Yeah.
them. And I did start with my coworkers who are also impacted at the same time as me by this layoff. If for anybody who hears this and listens to my my trailer episode, which is like my minute and 30-second spiel about what this will be about, it's the voices you hear of people saying the words that I wanted to resonate about the feelings around layoffs. Those are all, I think it's like 20 of coworkers, some of them who I didn't even know, but we were put in this group together, and I was like, would anybody be willing to help me out? I want some people's voices just saying words. And that was super important for me, and it added a lot of value. And for me, it would be like, no matter what happens with the podcast, I'll always be able to look back and be like, that was a great time. Since then, I had some people advocating for me in the background that were like, again, people I didn't know, but I met, that like, because of this layoff, I met them, and they advocate for me constantly. But that's then moved to, I literally just add people. I saw 2 people from Microsoft, which their episodes will be coming out very shortly, who I was like, that sounds like a cool story. One guy has 30,000 followers. The other was like a director in Xbox. And I was like, I'm not trying to be, Oprah. I'm not trying to be like a journalist. But that story, I think it could resonate. They're not going to go, typically in most cases, they're not going to CNN. They're not going to the Times. They're just living their life. They might make a post about it that 1,000 people will see, or 70,000 people will see, but 1,000 people will like. And I wanted to share it so more people can hear the story. Now, one of the guys I think did get picked up by like Bloomberg or the Times or something because he had so many followers, but his episode was awesome. Like, I loved talking with him. And that's what I do is I just find these people. I just got a message at 3 a.m. last night or this morning being like, we loved this post that you had. Would you be willing to like tell us more about what you're doing? And I was like, no, unless you want to come talk on my podcast. And then they were like, we would love to. We just started a business trying to help job seekers. And like, I was like, it's that easy. It's as easy as literally sending the first message, saying hello. I've already gotten my first little brand deal, which I thought was impossible. I have 5 followers. like, what are you getting as a brand deal with me? But the thing is it resonates. It's literally helping people through layoffs, like find jobs and automate the process. So I was like, of course I'll help. I'll work with you. Like, that would be amazing. I think just getting out there, starting, meeting those people, just add them, just connect with them. And I don't make sales pitches, right? I don't go, hey, here's my resume. Do you have a job for me? I don't think I've asked for a job from a single person yet. But what I will do is I'll connect with them, and I usually send a note over being like, I saw this post, thought it was lovely. Your opinion is super unique. I would love to have you on the podcast because that's what I do. And I said, here's the link to the podcast. Here's the link to my calendar. Grab some time. But it's so conversational. It's just
Yeah.
chatting. It's not the hard questions. I'm not going to ask how much money's in your bank account. I'm not in the business of trying to like divulge your secrets. And we won't talk about the company. I just want to hear your story about what happened. And if you're open to talking about the company, what was it like from your point of view working at amazing companies like Google or Microsoft, right? Before a layoff. So that's kind of what I've done. And people are very open to like being your friend online.
Yeah, it's so funny. I feel like that's one of the reasons I kind of started as well too. Is like that, I always say I'm a journalist at heart. I feel like that, but I never went to like journalism school or learn, the APA style and all those things. I just really like stories, and I was interested in entrepreneurship. And as soon as I talk with somebody, it became real. So I love like how that has ballooned from there, and like again, like you feel so by yourself when you're going through that experience that as soon as you hear somebody else, it provides some light that hey, I'm not by myself, but also this how this person, went through it or what they've been doing, and just realizing that um you don't have to write for the Times, you don't have to write for the Post and all those places because now we all have microphones, we all have tools literally at our fingertips that you can literally create your own media company, as I like to call it. But a lot of that is just because we have it. We have the stories and we have the opportunity to connect with people. And I think it's one of the most underutilized ways with, podcasting, especially is like there's a connection, there's relationships that have been built, even if you're just spending 10, 30 minutes, an hour
Yeah.
together, like you always have that. And there's a connection that's built as a result of
Yeah.
that.
No, it's so true. And even if you're not going to do a podcast and you're not going to start your own business, I think it's the messaging can still resonate of like just sending that connection request and like talking to a
Yeah.
person because a lot of people want to hear themselves talk, right? And they just want to be asked questions. And I'm not an expert on, I don't think a single thing you've asked me today, but everyone has an
Hmm.
opinion. And that's the thing that's
Hmm.
important is like if you can talk to people and hear their opinions, it's, they probably won't shut up.
Yeah, absolutely. But doesn't that get to like the actual human
Yeah.
part of everything? It's like being seen and heard and valued, and whether or not you're expert or not, you're literally being seen. I imagine, like, I know I felt that way when I got laid off. I felt less of that, and I had those experiences. So like I imagine being able to flip that to say, hey, you're doing really great. You did you had this 30,000. How did you do that? You worked at Microsoft. Like you probably go through your day to day. It's like, oh, well, I'm just going to work. I'm just
Yeah.
doing my thing. But in reality, that's the world to
Yeah.
somebody
No.
else.
And that's literally what I think I asked this person who I just, chatted with. Her name is Nellie. When that episode comes out, she's great. She's just, the energy
Yeah.
she had was amazing. And she was worried at first because she's like, I don't want to talk crap about the company. And I was like, yeah, neither do I. I want to talk about the amazingness because I've applied to Microsoft so many times and every time I get an instant rejection. And I see the people who are like, I got in, woo. And I'm like, I don't understand why. I literally lived next to it for 4 years. Why I've
Right.
not on the campus all day. Like, why am I not getting the interview? I don't understand. But still don't get the interview, so I'll never understand. And she was
Uh-huh.
just sharing about like what it was like to work there and I was like, that's so cool. And she's like, yeah, but you worked at Amazon. And I was like, yeah, it's different. It's like, it's not the same. And I was talking with someone else the other night and she was just like, this one person got a job so quickly, but he has Amazon in his resume. And I was like, so do I. She's like, wait, really? And I was like, I mean, we just met, so you wouldn't know that. But like, yeah, like, so do I. It's not necessarily like this big behemoth thing. It doesn't mean necessarily what you think it means. I think it's about how you talk about it and what you spin and what you
Yeah.
make it. And that's just the thing is like talk to people. But there is this perception, right, of like when I reach out to you, you might be like, wait, why is this guy reaching out to me? Like, I don't do anything worthy, right? I just do my thing. Like you mentioned, I just go to work, I just do
Yeah.
whatever. And so I just like to say, like, when you reach out, just naturally be curious and just talk to people, develop that
Yeah.
rapport, right? It's kind of like forming a group, right? You just kind of
Yeah.
go through the process of chatting with them and hearing them out. And maybe you never talk again. Maybe you do. Who knows?
Yeah, absolutely. It's getting back to that imposter syndrome that can kind of come up. Is like, who am I? But it's like I think the motivational poem or quote is like, who are you not to? To kind of be able to kind of do those things. And I think that being able to kind of flip that switch, have that different mindset, ends up opening so many different things. So I know we talked a little bit around like that technology piece. I would love, have you seen or what do you see around like those? Because I know like you want to have that opportunity to spend. You get in the door, you want to, spend and say, hey, I'm great because X, Y, Z, and A, B, and C. But what about those? And I don't know the industry, but like I feel like there's AI and stuff that I put in my resume and I don't even see the door. I don't get to talk to anybody or spend anything because it literally won't get past that stop. Have you seen or what kind of advice or information you can give to people like that?
Yeah. So like with technology, as in how do you beat technology to get the job, the interview type of thing, or like how do you bridge the gap between a non-tech field to a tech field?
More the former, but kind of along the lines of like what is even happening out there? Like what things should I be prepared for? Like things like that.
Yeah, I think every company's in a very different spot. If you're non-tech, you're probably just like dabbling with like prompting. They're
Yeah.
probably like, how can you make your job faster? And what I will say is like when I was working at Raytheon, I
Mm.
would go to these meetings. They were in person. We very rarely had Zoom meetings. And I feel like the company had Skype subscription. I don't think we used Zoom. So
Mhm.
this was back in 2018 and we would go to meetings and I sat there with a pen and paper and my laptop open and I was taking notes. And I worked with these people who are like in their 60s getting ready to retire. That was who I was surrounded by. And they were like, oh, can you send the notes? And you had like a week to send them. Then I went to Amazon and they were like, okay, in your first 2 weeks, write a 6-page paper on how we can optimize this city. And I was like, what does that even mean? It's Thanksgiving. Can I just like enjoy my Thanksgiving? I was up all night long crying, like writing this paper. And I went in there like, you didn't have to really write a 6-page paper. And I was like, dude, come on. So, you know, but in those
It's called
meetings,
hazing. That's
oh,
called hazing, Dre.
absolutely, absolutely. But like, the team was great and they taught me a lot. And I only cried 5 times while I was in that job. So it's fine.
There you go.
Once in front of my boss, which was really awkward because he was uncomfortable, but YOLO. And, you know, from there at Amazon, it was much different. You took a piece of paper. They literally handed out, if you had a 6-page paper, you made printout copies. And in the meeting, you handed everybody a copy. You gave everyone a red pen. This is real. I heard about this and I was like, there's no way this actually happens. And it is the most gut-wrenching. Like imagine being put on just like a stage and everyone just throws tomatoes at you and tells you all the terrible things you never want to hear about yourself, but that are true. Like you don't capitalize I, you don't double space after your sentence. And you're like, okay, rip me apart more. Why don't you? They do. They won't stop. And then they hand you everybody's paper back and every paper has all of this red. If you don't have red on your paper, you're amazing or you completely missed it. And they were like, you're pathetic. So then you get all of this feedback and you're like, what took me 2 weeks to like come up with this 6-page paper and get through this, I now have to go and make all these edits. And you almost can get like lost in the sauce of feedback and lost in this loop because someone's always going to have a new perception. And what the biggest thing I learned there was like, at some point you have to be like, I'm okay with this risk. I'm okay with the 10% that's not changed. I'm going to accept that as moving forward. And then from there, now we were working from home and Zoom became a thing that was really big. And it's just, what I've seen is like you had a lot of time to take notes and send that out with people has turned into, you should almost real time be able to do it, right? When we record a meeting now, or when we talk on Zoom, I record the Zoom calls. I actually take the transcript. I use that and I put it into our AI, whatever we're using, whether it's like Gemini, Claude, whatever the ChatGPT equivalent is. And you can put it in there with a prompt that can give you the same output every single time. And I thought that was like a year ago I was doing that, right? So now that's the expectation. That's the bare minimum, right? If I go to a company and they're like, oh yeah, type these notes up, I'm like, why? That's such a waste of time. Why wouldn't you want me to be a valuable part of the company? So I think those are the types of things, is like all of those little easy things. How can you automate them? How can you set up those workflows to basically just like, if you're going to send the same email once a week, that should be automated. Why are you wasting your time getting all that feedback, updates, notes? But it allows for more of the actual tangential work you're doing to be done, and you to have value in the conversations and actually make the plans. And I think that's the thing to be aware of is there's a few talks I have coming up that I'm going to be launching as episodes around AI as a whole and like what
Right.
tools are out there. But what I would say is, number one, go to ChatGPT. This is the advice I got. Granted, I already do this, but what I'll share with people
Hmm.
is like, go to ChatGPT, go learn all the things it can do. You can ask ChatGPT what it can do, and it
Hmm.
will tell you. I mean, I do it for everything, writing LinkedIn posts, which makes it easy, writing prompts for my podcasts, writing reach out messages to recruiters. Sometimes I just like gaslight myself into fighting with it because I'm like, I'm so bored. I have no one to talk to. I'm just going to fight with ChatGPT. I was like, be this person and hate me. And I'm going to tell you the situation and we're just going to fight back and forth. And I'm like, wow, now I don't even want to send that angry email to that customer service representative because I got my anger out. Like, I'm good, you know?
Right.
And find other tools. I found a really cool tool for marketers where you can very easily, with a YouTube video and downloading this thing that's free, you can make like these um, virtual automated like or animated um, like pictures of yourself. Like you could literally like, be a Viking and like storm the Capitol,
I'll go.
but it's so realistic and it looks like your face. Like it doesn't look like anime. I mean, if you look closely, you're like,
Yeah.
oh, that's fake. That's not really him. But like the fact that we've gotten to a point where like a very specific person who has taken 6 months to do those animations, that's not what it will now take 20 seconds to generate something like that and consistently do it. Like I wish I would have used YouTube more for the educational purposes of learning these things. I think there's nothing that
Yeah.
you can't learn. You don't necessarily need a course out there. If you can't afford a course, I would say go and try things, go learn them on YouTube, and then go document how you did it in your portfolio. And that is also an amazing way to kind of stand out to people, to jobs.
Yeah, I love those, and especially, and, with we're talking about technology, especially too. Like, some of these things are so new and so fast and ever changing that even if you have a course, by the time the ink dries, it's not even relevant anymore to some degree. So I think having that kind of pioneer mentality of like, hey, I'm just gonna try, I'm gonna test it out, I'm gonna get on YouTube and things like that that's how I started a lot of things, how I learned a lot of things, frankly, is just I'm very much so like I'll learn, I'll try it out, and then when I hit a roadblock, 'cause I will hit a roadblock, I'll go YouTube
Yeah.
it and say, okay, oh, that's what I was supposed to do. And then I just start to get better the more you kind of have that repetition, that opportunity to get to
Yeah.
do
If
it.
there's not YouTube videos out there for anybody who's like wondering, a lot of the times you can actually take a screenshot of the platform you're using. Like, let's just say you're using, I've never used Squadcast. And if I wanted to say,
Mhm.
like, oh, shoot, I don't know where the mute button is, I'm struggling to find it, I don't know how to do this, I could take a screenshot, put it in ChatGPT, and be like, this is Squadcast. How do I mute myself on this call or something? And it will typically give you a play by play of like exactly what to do. Gemini with Google will actually usually show you, and you can, if you pay the $20 subscription per month, it will talk you through how to do it. And it'll be like, hey, it looks like you're
Yeah.
using Squadcast, a great platform for podcasts. Why don't you go and check
Yeah.
out under the setting menu? Like it will virtual or it will audio walk you through how the solution. And you're like, well, like what? Like this is what I needed when I was in university trying to figure out calculus.
Exactly, exactly. It's wild. And it's so dangerous, yeah, with in terms of like if I had this stuff like in school, like what that would look like. And wow, it's just crazy like how the world has evolved and changed and like where the opportunities are. But I think to your point, like, yeah, there's things that I would say my thing, and this is the marketer in me, if there's a video that you're looking for and you can't find it, then you need to create that
Yeah.
video. That's your opportunity to be able to create something because you're not the only one that's probably searching for it. So I think that's absolutely awesome. So Dre, I appreciate you so much. I wanted to wind things down a little bit more. What would you say, what would kind of like be your last final thoughts for those people that are entrepreneurs and business owners that maybe, want to transition, or just anybody that is kind of going through that job journey? And I would love to hear, how people can subscribe to the podcast, get a hold of you, connect, and do all the awesome
Yeah,
things.
absolutely. I'm always open to connecting with anyone on LinkedIn. I love a new connection. I would just say if you connect with me, send me a message because I love to know how you found me, how you know me, and potentially be on the podcast. And then if you are looking to like make that shift or potentially go back into work, number one, if you can't find someone to talk to right away, because people do respond kind of slow because a lot of people reach out, leverage those tools, right? And I think there's this important aspect of feedback. Like if you're doing something and you want to start, let's say you're starting your resume and you're like, okay, how do I illustrate what I've done verbally into this like piece of paper that I only have so many lines on. Number one, use something like ChatGPT. But then once you've written it, once you've gotten it, put it back into the system and say, okay, now that I've written this, give me the perspective as a CEO who's hiring for this position. Give me a perspective as a recruiter who's screening for this position. And you start to understand the gaps that are missed. And that feedback can be so much more valuable and quicker than reaching out to a resume coach, reaching out to someone on LinkedIn who is a recruiter and being like, hey, can you give me feedback? Because that's going to take them a few hours to like read it, go through it in between their jobs. I would say definitely try any tools that you find. And if you find them and you've used them, just document that on your resume somewhere or in your LinkedIn profile. I would say those are the three biggest things: just connecting with people, using the tools, and then documenting it.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. And people that want to subscribe to the podcast and everything, what's the best way for them to do
All of
that?
it is actually linked. I don't know if you have show notes, but we should link it in our show notes
Yeah,
there.
yeah.
I have a link tree, which has all of my
Okay.
humor on TikTok, my educational videos on YouTube, my podcast, and other links that are just helpful. I have a bunch of free resources for people who are recently laid off, kind of the first steps that they can take. But there are businesses that I've worked with that I also like to highlight there and work and just kind of showcase the stuff that they do, that a lot of it's free. So, I would say look at the link tree and you can connect with me anywhere there.
Awesome. Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, I will definitely have that in the show notes. And I've been actually compiling a lot of like resources because I definitely obviously want to help people that are going through those challenges, being laid off, and maybe want to go that entrepreneurship route. But I found like by having these conversations, and this one of the reasons Dre and I connected is like I want to, even if it's not to find the next business or the next franchise, like if I could be of resource or help to people, I want to compile as much of that as possible. So I'm going to add that to the resource list I've been compiling too, because I think that one of the big things that, I've learned from this conversation is that we sometimes think we're by ourselves when we're going through those challenges and that journey. And I think that, back in the day, maybe we didn't have an opportunity to realize that we weren't by ourselves. But today we have podcasts, we have blogs, we have conversations, we have so many different ways that we can start to amplify those voices and start to tell the stories of people. One of my favorite shows, I remember when I was a kid, there used to be like a small segment, I think it was on CBS or something, where it's like everybody has a story. And everybody literally does, but it's only when creators like Dre, come together that those things actually happen. So I appreciate you so much in kind of sharing those stories, sharing that journey, sharing what people are going through for better or sometimes not so good too, because I think that's what makes us human. That's what helps us to connect. So I appreciate you so much for being on the show,
Yeah,
my friend.
absolutely. And I'm going to ask the same question to you. Do you have feedback
Yeah.
for people who are just in the thick of it, in a layoff right now, how to kind of stay positive, things that they should do? And then also, are you open to them connecting with you on LinkedIn?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll definitely have my information on LinkedIn as well too, so that you can definitely, connect with me. But those that are like definitely going through the thick of it, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head, on is related to like how you can definitely, leverage those things. But I think one thing that, came up, especially like during your story, I would say like for better or worse, I always say I'm the kid in the class that always would raise their hand and have a question. And I've just taken that to podcasting form where I'm always curious. I always want to know. Always want to know not just what somebody's doing, but why they're doing that. So I would encourage everybody to definitely be curious and definitely be open and realize that sometimes you don't have to sell the farm to have a conversation with somebody. You can just have the conversation. If you think you want to start a business, you don't have to put it all on black to start the business. You can just test out one thing. So I would definitely be open, experiment. A lot of times the way to get to where you want to be is not how everybody else is doing it. So don't be afraid to go against the grain, go that separate route. And frankly, you might be the one that's writing the story, writing the book, telling the people, I'm like, this is how you do it because this is how I did it. And that's how those things happen. So I would definitely encourage, everybody to be curious, and be hungry and have that opportunity to kind of lean forward. One thing I will say is that one of my favorite quotes that I said around entrepreneurship that I constantly say to myself, and I don't know who said it, so if you don't know who said it either, just attribute it to me, but it's don't tell me the sky is the limit when there's footprints on the moon. And I think so many times in this world, we're telling everybody you can't do this for that reason. You're not tall enough, you're not short enough, you're too old, you're too fat, whatever it might be. But the reality is there was once a time where all these things we're using was never thought possible, and now people are doing it. So don't allow those people to tell you the sky is ultimately the
I
limit.
love that. I just want to couple that with, shoot for the moon. And if you miss, you land among the stars. That's my favorite
So yeah.
one.
Yes, absolutely. So you're either way, you're in a galaxy, you're in the solar system, but you're doing phenomenal things. So take either of those quotes and definitely
Yeah,
run with it.
absolutely. Well, it was lovely talking with you today. Thank you so much.